Oh, yeah. Long may his story be told. Man, I just realized I have been studying this story for half a century, 50 years. And I realize that makes me seem like an old man. In fact, you know that picture of Wyatt Earp where he's sitting in the rocking chair? All my life, I thought, man, I wonder if I'll live to be that old. Well, he's 74 in that photograph. And that's my age right now. So that's shocking to me. But I'm just a piker in this quest to find out the truth about Wyatt Earp because I was just reading. We're doing a special issue on the 140th anniversary of the gunfight of the OK Corral. It's going to the printer even as you speak. And if you're good, I'm going to show you a sneak peek of that cover because I printed it out. And you can't tell anybody, but I'm going to show it to you. It's so dang groovy. But anyway, in the issue, I decided to ask all my friends the questions I'm going to ask you tonight. And so I have accrued so many friends over the years. I include Paul Andrew Hutton, John Bosnecker, Casey Tifatiller, Alan Barra, Marshall Trimble, John Langelier. These are Jeff Morey. These are the Earp guys, okay? They've spent their life. They make me look like a piker, as I started to say. In fact, in his comments, Marshall Trimble admits he's been studying this story for 76 years, okay? That's the truth, okay? And he has a lot of great things to say about it. You're going to really enjoy this issue, as I did, because I realized that, first of all, that song, I used to listen to that song every Thursday at my grandmother's house. And right in the middle of the song, she told me how Wyatt Earp was the biggest jerk who ever walked the West. And I really firmly believe that moment led to this moment. In other words, it upset me because my grandmother I loved dearly, and I'm looking at the TV, right, which never lies, and I'm going, somebody's not telling the truth here. And so it kind of set me off. Who was this guy really? And to give you a little background on my grandmother, she came from a ranching family in the boot heel of New Mexico. Well, if you know your geography, you know that Galeyville, where the outlaws hung out, and the boot heel of New Mexico, Curly Bill had a ranch over there. And so they were there in 1900. And so the OK Corral was only 2 decades before. And so they knew people that knew the story. And of course, they knew it from the cowboy side. And of course, the cowboys do not like the Earps. And in fact, and in the old days, I don't know if it's still true down in Cochise County, but if you go to Tombstone, everybody in the town, everything's based on Wyatt Earp. And so it's Wyatt Earp is the hero, Wyatt Earp this. But you go 5 miles out of town and you run into a rancher. Can we use this gate? Can we come over here? And they have nothing nice to say about the Earps. They consider them interlopers. Number 2, they were from Iowa. And number 3, they were Republicans. In those days, it was flipped. The ranchers were Democrats and the townspeople were Republican. It kind of did a flip in the 60s. That's another story. But my point is that so I come to this with a very conflicted background. I had my family who didn't like Wyatt Earp, and then I was a young, impressionable boy watching Hugh O'Brien, who I got to tell you was flawless. And he was this lawman who just cleaned up the West, and he drank milk, and he never swore. And he was married to one woman his whole life, or maybe he was a bachelor. I don't know. I didn't care because he fought it out at the gunfight at the OK Corral. And so tonight, we're going to talk about some of the questions I've learned in a half century of research to find out who was this guy, Wyatt Earp. Was he a hero or was he a villain? Okay. Or was he the biggest jerk who ever walked the West, like my grandmother claimed? Right off the bat, and this happened early, even while the show was still on the air, there were 2 researchers, who both ended up to be friends of mine, people that I met, John Gilcrease and Frank Waters. They both did research down in Pinell, Arizona, and they found the death certificate and the inquest notes that Mattie Blaylock Earp, Wyatt Earp's second wife, had turned to prostitution because Wyatt had abandoned her, and she overdosed on laudanum, And she said, quote, Wyatt Earp ruined my life, end of quote. And when they discovered that, one of them, I think it was John Gilchrist, said, Wyatt Earp will never be portrayed as a hero again. He's going to be relegated to the ash heap of history because nobody could survive that broadside from an ex-wife who said, Wyatt Earp ruined my life, and she committed suicide from an overdose of drugs. Of course, that is your typical obit in Sun City West today because, well, you might say the Times caught up with him. And I must fast forward and tell you that makes Kevin Jarre's script that became Tombstone in 1993 even more incredible because he built on top of that and didn't duck it. And we have a character, Wyatt Earp's second wife, Maddie Blaylock. And in some of the first scenes, she's asking if she can get laudanum, and somebody lends it to her. And Wyatt Earp then meets Sarah Josephine Marcus. And it was thought in 1960 that nobody could be a hero and still have that part of it. Now, it gets worse, okay? That's what we believed in 1960, up even till the 90s. But must be about 10 years ago now, a guy was doing research, genealogy research in Peoria, Illinois. And Stuart Lake's book came out in 2930, something like that, 1930. And all of a sudden, Wyatt Earp just kind of came out of nowhere. He was famous in the Old West, notorious probably is a better word, in the cow towns, and he was a noted sportsman, that kind of thing. But the thing that happened when Stuart Lake's book came out is that he just went through the roof, and he becomes this super lawman, and who is flawless. And in the book, Stuart Lake says that he that he was hunting buffalo in 1872, and which at the time, if you're going to write a book in the 30s, you had to do a couple things. You had to be either attacked on a wagon train by Indians. That was one staple of the stories that were told then, and you had to hunt buffalo. Well, of course, now people who hunt buffalo are considered, the lowest of the low. It's like they decimated this natural resource, etc. But anyway, so this guy's doing research in Peoria, Illinois, on his family, and he runs across. He's looking at microfiche. Remember that? He's looking through there, and he finds this news item that says Wyatt Earp was arrested today on a floating bagnio. And he thought, oh, that's interesting, and so he wrote it down. And he goes on, researching his family. And so he goes home and he calls a friend of his who's an Earp kind of an aficionado, and he says, "Hey, was Wyatt Earp in Peoria, Illinois in 1872? And the friend said, no. Wyatt Earp was hunting buffalo in Kansas in 1872. It must be a different guy. It must be this guy with the same name. So the guy goes back the next day and he's studying the microfiche, and he comes to the second article, and it says, Wyatt Earp and his brother Morgan were arrested yesterday. And all of a sudden, all the researchers descended upon Peoria, Illinois. And here's our hero, Wyatt Earp, acting as a bouncer on a floating bagnio, and that's French for a floating whorehouse. And come to find out, somebody looked at the census, and come to find out, he's living in a whorehouse. Okay, so not only is he a bouncer, but it appears that he's actually living in the whorehouse. Well, we knew even in the 80s and 90s that several women in Wichita, where Wyatt Earp was a lawman, we knew that several women went by the name Earp. And so that kind of conveniently gets shunted off, and the people who love Wyatt Earp say, well, he just turned a blind eye, those women, blah, 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 and they explain it away. Well, now this is much more serious, because now was Wyatt Earp a pimp? And with the recent book, I'm jumping around here, but you're going to appreciate it later, John Bosnecker's new book on Wyatt Earp and the Devil's Herd, he found out that three of the brothers were pimps. Okay, James and Wyatt, James and Morgan were all pimps. Virgil had been charged both with arson and fraud. And when I was growing up and first doing this, it was believed, even when I was doing my book on Wyatt Earp in 1993, that Virgil was kind of the Wyatt Earp was the bad boy, and Virgil was the good guy, and his wife Allie, and he was the real lawman, because Allie Earp, Virgil's wife, said in the 40s, she'd lived long enough to see My Darling Clementine. She had read the Stuart Lake book. She had read the Walter Noble Burns book, Tombstone, and she pronounced them all gingerbread. And of course, there's the quote, all these books making him out a big hero are pure gingerbread. And she was an amazing woman. And now we find out, thanks to John Bosenecker's research, that she was also a prostitute. And when Frank Waters first met her, she was a house cleaner. He lived in L.A., and Allie Earp came in to clean his house. And when she found out who she was, he noted that she had carried a flask in her boot. So she was kind of a tough old gal. And we knew that, but we didn't know that she was also involved in prostitution. So now all these things start to pile up, and it really becomes harder and harder to think of Wyatt Earp as this, well, he certainly wasn't flawless, let's put it that way. But I love, and you're going to see this in the issue that's at the printer right now, you're going to see Mary Doria Russell, who wrote a great book called Epitaph, and she has a great comment. Let's see, I don't want to mash it up here. She says, Wyatt never claimed he was a hero. He was dogged for the rest of his long life by the worst 30 seconds of it. And that's why I asked the question, can a man be judged by 27 seconds of his life? And as you'll see, I'm kind of foreshadowing here, but yes, you can. And can you build a monument to a part-time lawman? Here's the other thing about Wyatt Earp. When I was 10 years old, I thought, well, here's this guy cleaned up every cow town. He was he was flawless, and he was a lawman for his whole life. No, he was a part-time lawman, and more often than not, he was dealing faro and being involved in well, I want to say racketeering, but he was on that side. He was on the green felt side of the underbelly of mining life, where the boomers congregated. And I think it's interesting that in Tombstone, we have this idea that Wyatt Earp would be in the upper crust of society, that he would be, everybody would want to be with him. And the matter of fact is, they lived on the wrong side of the tracks, as it were. They lived way down on Fremont, and if you know where Virgil's house is, it used to be there, burned a couple decades ago. But I used to go down there just to see that house and kind of walk where they walked. But they lived on the bad side of town, and they were blackballed out of the elite, private clubs that even Tombstone had, a mining camp. It was rather Tony for those times. And so they were, in terms of society, they were not in the upper crust. So what you have here is a very complex man, a very complex family. They called them the Fighting Earps. And I think it's interesting that out of all those guys, 2 died of gunshot wounds, 4 were wounded, and their father, Nicholas, in the center there, was kicked by a mule, when he was in the Army. And only one came out without a scratch, and that's Wyatt Earp. And I think that alone is a pretty amazing fact, that in the OK Corral fight itself, which is coming up on 140 years, Wyatt Earp did not receive a scratch, and 3 men were hurled into eternity in the duration of a moment. That was the headline in the Tombstone Epitaph the next day. And almost everyone, Virgil Earp was hit in the calf, Morgan Earp was hurt across the back, and only one man escaped without a scratch, other than Ike Clanton, who ran away, and that's Wyatt Earp. Now, what I think is phenomenal about the story, and you don't really see this in the depictions of the fight, is we have this idea, and in fact, when it's portrayed so often, there's been 45 movies on Wyatt Earp, and every time, most of the time, when you see the fight, it's in this big football field, and they're all have their area, and it's got a Sergei Leone kind of good, bad, and the ugly close up on the eyes, and they're far away, and they're shooting. No, they were literally, they could touch each other at the beginning of it, because well, I've said this before, and it's really true. The lesson to take away from that fight is do not take a drunk dentist to make a misdemeanor arrest. That's smart, okay? And it's the fact that the Cowboys were waiting in Doc Holliday's side yard, okay, where he was rooming at Fly's boarding house. And in fact, Clanton had been down there earlier in the day after he had been drinking all night and after he had spent 2 or 3 hours in Kelly's wine rooms. Okay, this is what I love about the research. You think about, well, he's in the Crystal Palace and you can hear that piano playing that same song and everybody's, yeah, you got the cowboy. No, he's spending 2 hours in Kelly's wine rooms. Okay, they have 27 imported wines, some from Europe. They have imported beer from Colorado called Coors. They have 5 billiard tables and an indoor bowling alley. Okay, I'm sure it didn't have the full lanes like we think of, but that's what the ad says, okay? And it makes you wonder if they even heard of rot gut, okay? So Clanton spends several hours in Kelly's wine rooms, and he's drunk because he's been drinking all night, and he's anybody who listens, he's going down the street saying, when the Earp show, the ball will open. And at one point, he goes down to Fly's boarding house looking for Doc because he knows he's rooming there with Big Nose Kate. And so Doc's sleeping off, drunk, no doubt. And Kate runs into Mrs. Fly and she said, Clanton's looking for you. And here's one of the coolest lines in the whole thing. She comes in and tells Doc, who's sitting up in bed by now, and she says, Doc Holliday is looking for you, honey. And he says, if the Lord lets me live long enough, he'll see me. See, there isn't a writer in the world that can make that line better. And it's the truth. Okay. She testified that is the truth. Okay. So when the day's events proceed and the Earps are at Hafford's Corner, a big crowd gathers there, maybe 200 people, they think. And so the whole town was just up. And this is more like a schoolyard fight. You ever been in a schoolyard fight, where you're at the drinking fountain and somebody runs up to you and they go, hey, Billy Logus is going to shoot Arnold and they're going to fight. They're going to fight down. Where? And everybody starts running and you're down there and then you're egging them on and you're hoping they're going to fight. And then they start fighting and you back off, Exactly what happened here. It's a schoolyard fight with guns. Okay. And so this crowd grows huge down at Hafford's Corner. And people are running between where the Cowboys are, standing in Doc Holliday's side yard, and they're running back and forth. One guy testifies, he goes, I ran up to Mr. Clanton, and I ran into the vacant lot, and I saw 4 farmers. I love that. He doesn't think of them as cowboys. I saw 4 farmers, okay? And Billy Clanton turned and saw me, and he put his hand on his gun, and then he saw that I wasn't going to do him any harm, and so he let go. That's just fabulous detail. So now the Virgil Earp, who's the city marshal, he gives the Wells Fargo shotgun to Doc Holliday. Mistake number 2, okay. Number 1 is don't take a drunk dentist to make a misdemeanor arrest, but he gives him the shotgun, and he says, put this under your coat, and they start walking. Now there's kids following them, people, gamblers, hangers-on, scum, journalists, they're following him, and they're like, oh, they're going to fight, and they turn the corner. Now, this is where you got to give the Earp stand, okay? They didn't know. There could have been 25, there could have been 100 guys down there, and they kept walking. That is pretty amazing to me. And so when they turn the corner, the Cowboys are looking out from the vacant lot, and they pull back into the lot. Okay, they could only see about a half a horse. There's 2 horses in there. Okay, now when you go to Tombstone and you see the reenactment, they don't use horses, and I'll tell you why. You ever been around a horse when somebody fires a gun off? It's not a pretty sight. And they tried it once. I was talking to Ben Trawick, and he said they tried it early on, and it just the horses sunfish, and by sunfish. For all you flatlanders out there, sunfishing is when a horse shows his belly up. He's sun fishing. Get it? Anyway, they get to where the Cowboys are congregated and standing, and Doc Holliday goes, they're in my side yard. They're here to kill me. So he brandishes that big old double barrel smoke wagon, and that's when everything goes south. And Virgil Earp says, hold on, I didn't mean that. He was really talking to he was really talking to his own man, Doc Holliday. And Addie Borland, who was across the street sewing, she testified that four men walked down the street. The man, a tall man in a gray suit, ran up to one of the other guys and then stepped back. And that's him, Doc Holliday, going up to Tom McClower, we believe. And then the firing became general, but not totally general. And this is what I find so amazing. In the middle of this, the guy who started the whole thing, Ike Clanton, runs up to Wyatt Earp and grabs him by his arms and so says, don't shoot, don't, just trying to get him to stop. And Wyatt Earp has the wherewithal to have a conversation, and it goes like this: get to fighting or get away. I just love that. It doesn't get any better than that. Get to fighting or get away. And that's in the testimony in the Spicer hearing. And so Ike Clanton gets away. He runs. I have an illustration in the forthcoming issue, one of my favorite. It's a black and white scratch board, and it's of you can see his foot. He's hot footing it. He's beating cheeks around the corner, and he runs through the Flies boarding house, through the Flies photo gallery, out the back, and hides in some a Mexican cantina down on the south of town, and is hiding in there. So that's your Ike Clanton story. Sorry, Terry Ike Clanton, who's probably not enjoying that at all. So anyway, that's the gist of the fight, and I believe that's the 27 seconds, the 30 seconds that Mary Adoria Russell's talking about, that cursed Wyatt Earp for the rest of his life. Think about this. Wyatt Earp lived to be almost 80. Okay, he spent 29 months in Tombstone. It was a very, very small fraction of his life, and he wanted to. People started to tell the stories. In fact, Billy Breckenridge came out to Vidal, California, across the river from Parker, Arizona, where Earp wintered for 22 years. Think about that. He spent 29 months in Tombstone and that whole fight, and he spent 22 years every winter wintering near Vidal, where his mining claims were. And the reason he couldn't really go to Arizona, there are some exceptions, but the reason he didn't like to go to Arizona is because he was he was a felon. He gave Frank Stilwell both barrels of a shotgun at the Tucson train station when they were delivering Morgan's body out of Tombstone. And so he was a felon, and he couldn't, and there was still a murder warrant for his arrest in Arizona. So he very strategically had his mining claim on the California side. But I was giving a talk at the Parker Historical Society, and this to me is worth all of the BS that I've put up with for 5 decades, because every once in a while you'll get this little thing. And here I am talking about Wyatt Earp at his mining claim, the Happy Days Mine, across the river from Parker, Arizona. And he, I wonder aloud if he ever came over to the Arizona side. And sure enough, this guy stands up, an old man, and he said, Wyatt Earp ate at my mom's cafe. He would come. He loved her rhubarb pie. Well, it doesn't get any better than that. It does not get any better than that. I just love that little detail like that, and I never would have gotten it if I hadn't. I went to speak at the Parker Historical Society. We got a visitor here. Who's here? Oh, it's Uno. Uno's here. It's that time of day when Uno says, you know what? You talked for a long time. I want to talk about Hollywood and how he ended up to be known as this flawless hero. And that is, he was in the last outlaw town, which was Hollywood, California. And it was founded by outlaws because they were trying to get away from Thomas Edison and his patent on the film projector. They had to pay him. And so they got on a train, these 4 outlaws, and they went, let's get as far away from him as we can. And legend says that they stopped in Flagstaff, one of their places they thought they could build a movie community away from Edison. And it was snowing. So they said, let's take the train to the end of the line. And the end of the line was a little farming community named Hollywood, California. And so these outlaws are they have their sets built on wheel so that they can, if the law comes to try to bust them, they can go to Tijuana and go across the border and escape. And so these outlaws, and so Wyatt Earp fits right in this town, okay, because it's just full of all the grifters and everything. Great quote from Zane Grey, who said, I will not say that all of the people in the motion picture industry are crooks, but I will say that all the crooks in Hollywood are in the motion picture industry. So here's Wyatt Earp in an outlaw town. He fits right in, okay, grifters and all kinds of stuff. And they don't think his story is sellable. And so Wyatt wants to vindicate himself because a guy who burns him is Billy Breckenridge, who comes to visit him at his mining claim. And he gives him all sorts of information, Wyatt does. And Breckenridge's book comes out, Hell Dorado. And in the book, Breckenridge says that the cowboys were trying to surrender and they were unarmed and they were shot down by the Earps while they had their hands in the air, which was in the old days when I was first going down to Tombstone, there was a sign in front of where Vogan's was, where Morgan Earp was shot, and the sign said Morgan Earp was beat to the draw here, and that's how prejudicial the town was before Stuart Lake's book comes out and changes the course of history and changes Wyatt's life, and he never lives to see this. Here's the connection on that. So there's a young press secretary for the president of the United States, Teddy Roosevelt, and Teddy Roosevelt had all sorts of Western heroes to the White House. Geronimo was at the White House. Pat Garrett came to the White House, and Bat Masterson, who was a sports writer in New York at that time, and Bat Masterson said, the true story of the West will never be told unless Wyatt Earp talks, and he's not talking. And then Bat Masterson went back to New York and died at his desk typing his story. And so this young press secretary goes out to L.A., finds Wyatt Earp, who's old, and answers everything with, yep, nope, don't recall. And then he dies, and so the guy can write anything he wants, and we get Wyatt Earp, Frontier Marshal, and it blows the lid off of everything. Anyway, is Wyatt Earp the biggest jerk who ever walked up west? Yeah, probably, but so am I, okay? So we all are. We're all just human, and I think that's... my grandmother was right. Okay, if you're on that side of the divide, on the political divide, you don't like those interlopers, the Earps and their law dogs, et cetera, et cetera. And so I get that. And you'll see from all my friends' comments, it runs the gamut. We've got Michael Bean saying Wyatt Earp was a killer, a pimp, and a horse thief. Boom, done. We've also got a good friend of mine, Tom Ross, who says Wyatt Earp matters because of what he means, not for who he really was. And, I told you, we've done Wyatt Earp so many times. I know you know this. Look at all those issues we've done on. And I've done, of course, I've done the OK Corral fight in 3 different books. And here's 2 of them right here. And I told you I was going to sneak in, if I could, the Wyatt Earp cover that just went to the printer. Here it is. Don't tell anybody. Please don't tell anybody. Okay, here it is. Is that groovy or what? That's a Dan the Man Harshberger special right there. And that issue is you got to get that issue. It's the October issue, and if you're a subscriber, you're going to get it in your mailbox, and you better get it quick because this puppy's going to sell out. Special edition comes out. It's going to be great. Let's see. Let's go to questions here. Dusty Pendleton wants to know, was the map that accompanied Wyatt Earp's description of the OK Corral shooting a legitimate one? No, it was not. It had been 50 years. Wyatt Earp drew a map of where the gunfight took place, and he put it at the rear entrance of the OK Corral. And that he would misremember that, or that it just defies gravity. And what are you doing back there? I got family here who wants to be in the shot. I'm not sure why.
I know.
Yeah.
I was just trying to help you get.
Yeah. You're really helping me. Okay. So yes, the map is not legit. And Wyatt Earp drew it. Go figure. Bear Unruh wants to know who even had the full jurisdiction. The movie makes it a little blurry. Were the Earps in their own rights to have opened fire in the first place? No, and here's where it really gets murky, okay? So the Earp boys are at Hafford's Corner, and they start walking. Are they going down there as lawmen, or are they going down there to face an affront from a rival gang or people who are giving them death threats? Okay, Virgil Earp was the city marshal, so they had some legit there. Wyatt Earp was a deputy U.S. marshal. They had some legitimacy there. And some claim that Morgan was special, blah, blah. So they were lawmen. Now, here's where it ends. Johnny Behan, the top lawman in the county of Cochise County, he is the reigning lawman, and he sees the Earps are coming. Now, he wants to avoid the fight. He always gets sandbagged for this, but I don't see it that way. He ran down the street and he said, "Don't go down there. I've disarmed them." Well, he's lying. He's fibbing. But he's trying to stop the fight, okay? And when the Earps and Doc Holliday blow by Behan, they stopped being lawmen and they became adversaries who wanted to get up in the grill of their enemies and say, as one of them said, and I think this was Wyatt Earp, "You sons of bitches have been looking for a fight, and now you can have it." It doesn't get any better than that, and I think that's Wyatt Earp. So, yes, both are true. They were lawmen and they were there on their own, and everything went south. It was bad management as a policeman. But isn't it ironic that something that tragic, that ridiculous, would end up to be the most definitive moment in the history of the West when it comes to a gunfight? And by the way, Stuart Lake's original title was Wyatt Earp, Frontier Gunfighter, and Josephine Sarah Marcus, Sadie, would not let him do it. Al Maria, can Bob speak to Wyatt's life with his first wife and what happened to him after she passed away? Tragic case there with his first wife, who probably died in childbirth of their son, and he kind of goes off the rails. He's accused of absconding with funds. His father was the constable in Missouri, Lamar, Missouri, where they were, and he is soon arrested for horse stealing. Now, it's interesting that the Kevin Costner movie Wyatt Earp deals with that rather honestly, I think. And all of these incidents, I mean, if you add them up, if you add up the Wyatt Earp and all the Earp rap sheet, it does not read well. These are hooligans, okay? In fact, Virgil had been charged with both arson and fraud. He was shot by a hooker in a bordello. His Allie was a prostitute. I mean, it's dark stuff. And anyway, last question. Steve Todd, I'll be in Tombstone for the 140th. Will you, Bob? I'm trying to set up a symposium. I am so inspired by this issue that we've just completed. And I would love to get half those people at Shefflin Hall and discuss this and have them tell you their version of what I'm trying to tell you and see if who you agree with. So there you have it. That's the news here from Bob Boze Bell studio. By the way, we had a huge storm here, knocked out my internet. Almost thought we weren't going to be able to do the show today, but we were able to pull it off. I got to thank Mariah for that, and Ken Marsano, who's on a boat somewhere in the Pacific and doesn't care about us. That's a lie. I'm kidding. He cares about us. He made this happen. So thank you. And was he flawless? No. But you know what? You got to give it to him. The